Marvelous hello, friends and loved ones! How are you today? Now, you all know that I love Persona, but there's one story that stands out to me as particularly interesting. I actually really love the story it tells and the characters it introduces, which is why it's all the more frustrating and confusing for me to call it one of the most mishandled, awkward fumbles of potential I've seen in the entire franchise. So, get ready for a field trip to the streets, because today, I'm looking at Persona 5 Tactica. DLC chapter, Repaint Your Heart. Now, I admit it probably seems a bit peculiar to dedicate an entire video to a DLC story when I've never really talked much about the main game, so here's my in-depth review of Persona 5 Tactica. Yeah, it's alright. Okay, so now we can dive into Repaint Your Heart. But before that, I'd like to take a moment to talk about this channel's newest partner, FiGGYZ. These are a brand new line from First 4 Figures, makers of some amazingly high quality stuff, and they've got these great little magnetic collectibles now. Each one comes with a double-sided metal plate that you can magnetize them to and have them mounted on their standees or attach them straight to the wall. Now, I'm not being paid to say this, but they did send me a few samples so I could get a feel for them and fill you all in. The figures are flexible, but really high quality, and the metal plates feature some fantastic artwork on both sides. FiGGYZ come from a wide range of awesome franchises like Banjo-Kazooie, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Metaphor ReFantazio, and of course, Persona. I've got the first wave of Persona 5 characters right here, which includes Joker, Mona, and Panther, and they've got way more waves planned in the future. Maybe we can even get Akechi and Yoshizawa one day? FiGGYZ? Relevant plug. Each FiGGYZ also has a chance of coming with a chase background variant, and you can scan your unique unit's QR code into the FiGGYZ app to keep track of your collection and reap some awesome rewards. If you want to start building your FiGGYZ empire today, you can click my link in the video description or use coupon code STRAIN. If you purchase 3 FiGGYZ, you get an automatic 5% off, but when you buy 4, that coupon code gets you an additional 5% off. So snag those Persona 5 characters and grab yourself a favorite from another set, like Gallica, Dark Magician Girl, Metal Sonic, or even Pyramid Head for extra savings, getting some awesome collectibles of your favorite franchises, and to help the channel out. That's like 3 layers of win-win right there. Thanks to FiGGYZ for providing me with these samples and this partnership opportunity, and thanks to all of you that go ahead and check it out. Alright, on with the video. So, the first thing I want to do is just summarize the story to get everyone up to speed, and from there I'll go into the things that I particularly liked, and why I ended up feeling as frustrated as I did. And just to avoid any angry comments, obviously I'm going to be spoiling Repaint Your Heart, but consider this your spoiler warning for Persona 5 Tactica and Persona 5 Royal as well. The story opens up with Ren getting a text from Yoshizawa asking him to meet her in a nearby alleyway. Morgana, sensing this might be a confidant event, actually doesn't tag along, and we're treated to a convenient news report about a Banksy-like radical artist named Guernica that's been making a splash with their rebellious and seemingly impossible murals. Like this one that Yoshizawa wanted to show Ren of his persona, Arsene, being eaten by a rat. Also, Akechi shows up, because he conveniently got hired to investigate Guernica, don't question it. But then, a mysterious voice calls out, and the 3 of them get sucked into the mural, winding up in a bizarre metaverse known only as The Streets, a city of night where everything is splattered in paint. After Joker, Crow, and Kasumi knock a few of these jet-set radio-looking goons around, we're introduced to the leader of the streets, Guernica, this white-cladded, tattooed hottie with a gas mask and a lust for blood, because she's shooting down these mouse mascots, or mouscots, left and right. And for absolutely no adequately explained reason, getting shot makes them swell up like a Violet Beauregard fetishist until they explode. Guernica is also joined by this foppish pink parrot named Jerry. Guernica tries to kill us, so we beat her up.
What bullshit!
Take that, Guernica!
But when things start to get dicey, we're saved by a mysterious hole beneath our feet that was opened up by this little gray mouse girl with blue hair. She is oh so small, and her name Luca. Luca saw us stand up to Guernica and thinks we might be able to help each other out, so she shows the gang Guernica's piece, which looks almost identical to the one that brought them here in the first place. It turns out that Guernica's artwork has the power to, like... Okay, you know when you're waiting in the checkout line with only 2 things and the person in front of you has like 80 jillion things and you know they see you, but they don't offer to let you go first and you think, I should run them over in the parking lot. No? Really? Just me? Okay, fine. Well, whatever. Guernica's art has the power to basically make people act on those type of thoughts, eventually leading to widespread violence and chaos. But Luca proposes that we can stop Guernica's rampage if we just find the first mural that she ever painted, which has been split up into 3 parts. Essentially, it acts sort of like Guernica's treasure, but also the cores from the jails in Strikers, while the streets act like one of Tactica's kingdoms. It sounds a little more complicated than it is, but it is essentially just, yeah, we gotta go find all 3 things. Between the group thing getting, we come to learn a bit more about this world and the characters in it. Like how Guernica didn't really start acting all psycho murder crazy until after Jerry showed up, and how even though Luca is a wee little baby mouse girl, she's actually Guernica's older sister. The 2 of them were orphans who grew up on the streets, but Luca eventually starved to death, leaving Guernica all alone. So the Luca that we know is basically just the lingering physical manifestation of Guernica's memory of her sister. Meanwhile, Jerry's plan involves brainwashing and training Guernica so that when they go out into the real world, she can use her art to rile up all of humanity, forcing them to eventually wipe themselves out and creating a world of stillness and nothingness. Unfortunately for the bird, Luca's attempts to call out to Guernica and rebuild her mural give her these splitting headaches, which loosen Jerry's control over her. Also, probably doesn't help that we beat Guernica up like 4 times throughout the story.
Take that, Guernica.
But we eventually rebuild Guernica's mural, which is a loving tribute to the 2 sisters. Luca absorbs the mural into herself and believes that with its power, we should be able to get through to Guernica, whose real name is Tao by the way, and break Jerry's grasp on her once and for all. So the gang breaks into Jerry's lair, which by the way is this pristine white palace, which I think creates a really nice contrast to the dark paint-covered streets, and after beating up a hyper-brainwashed Guernica, Luca's message of hope, kindness, sisterhood, and the promise they made to use art to change the world for the better all manage to get through, revealing Tao's true form and freeing her from Jerry's control. Jerry reveals herself to be a powerful god, because of course she is, and she's not happy about her plans getting ruined. So the trio takes her down with a little help from Guernica herself, who uses her paint gun to create a path they can use to attack the bird, and she even splatters Jerry's white marble visage with a barrage of paint. Jerry is defeated, revealing that she failed in her goal, and oh yeah, she's just the minion of some unseen lord. Tao says farewell to the Phantom Thieves, and they do that usual thing of saying they're gonna meet again, but come on, we all know as soon as they're back in the real world that the slate is wiped clean. Nobody in the trio remembers anything that just happened, we're never gonna see Guernica again, we see Jerry apologizing to her boss before getting completely wiped out of existence, and Ren heads home to see a piece on the news about Guernica's latest political mural. I also just want to quickly point this out because it's funny to me. If you look at this entire chapter from Morgana's perspective, it's the story of Ren getting a text from Yoshizawa asking him to meet her in an alleyway, and coming back a few hours later seeming, in Morgana's words, awfully cheerful. Yeah, okay. Then there's also a post-credit scene of Toshiro and his dad watching the same news report on Guernica and talking about it, and the final shot is Guernica's mural reflected in Toshiro's eyes, which helps set up Tactica, and honestly, this is really cool, and I really liked this, and oh, I am gonna have more to say about this later. Okay, so that's the basic plot, and when I look at just that, I can't stress enough how much I enjoyed this. Like, with all my repainted heart. I think the streets is an awesome setting that feels really memorable. I think it was great getting an entire story that focuses on just Ren, Akechi, and Yoshizawa, and I also found myself really liking all the new characters, like Luca, Guernica, and even Jerry were all fantastic to me. While the main Tactica game felt like Toshiro and Arena's story and the Phantom Thieves were just like there to help, Repaint Your Heart managed to feel more like a traditional Phantom Thieves heist, with a story that focused more on stealth and stealing a valuable treasure to help the corrupted ruler, rather than just beating them up. Even though we still did that a lot.
Take that, Guernica.
So, yeah, okay, I loved it. What's the problem? Well, much like a great piece of art, it all eventually comes down to the finer details, doesn't it? While I appreciated the broad strokes on this canvas, those little imperfections quickly started adding up for me, and look, I want to make one thing very clear. I am about to start complaining a lot about Repaint Your Heart, but it's much less out of anger and more just disappointment, knowing something that I did enjoy as much as I did could have been so much better. So let's start with one of the biggest and most glaring issues that I have, and that is when the story takes place. Now, I don't have an exact date, but we can definitely narrow it down a bit. Given that Prince Akechi is already a member of the team, we know this takes place during the Sai Palace arc after he joins the party on October 29th. Now, Persona Q2 opens with Akechi's quote-unquote first trip into Mementos, meaning it has to take place prior to Akechi's Rank 8 Confidant event in Royal, since that has him going into Mementos with Joker, and the earliest possible day you can see that event is November 5th. The Rank 7 event unlocks on November 2nd, and while this is purely a guess, I imagine Repaint Your Heart takes place between Ranks 7 and 8 in Akechi's Confidant. In other words, I think it's a safe bet that Repaint Your Heart occurs between November 3rd and November 14th, since the 15th is the last possible day to see Akechi's Rank 8 event. Basically, yeah, Repaint Your Heart happens in early to mid-November. And that's stupid. Look, if I may go on a bit of a tangent here, I'm so sick of Atlus doing this thing where they're so afraid of spoiling their main games in the side games that the side games suffer for it. I would have so much more respect for Atlus if they would just go, you know what? No, you should have played Royal by now. There's no reason why this couldn't have been a third semester story. By forcing it to take place during Sai's Palace, Persona 5 fans who are already familiar with these characters and their arcs, who are, you know, probably the ones most likely to buy a DLC chapter in a Persona 5 side game that specifically focuses on them, know they're getting far less fleshed out and honest versions of who these characters are. Like, I'm sorry, but this time period is not when either of them are at their most interesting. I know the Persona Q games are also these mid-quills that tell a story with non-fully developed versions of the characters, but those games rarely did it to such a detriment as Repaint Your Heart seems to. Like, to use an actual example from the story, the moment when Luca reveals that she's Guernica's sister and that she actually died a long time ago, Yoshizawa is just like, I also have a dead sister. But like, those familiar with Royal know it goes so much further beyond that, and I feel like Yoshizawa's feelings and drive to want to help these sisters reconnect in a way that she can't with her own sister, and knowing that because it wasn't too late for her, it's not too late for Guernica, would be a lot more emotionally interesting if she was actually just Sumire at this point. And even Guernica's initial bloodlust and murder spree has some interesting parallels to Akechi's true nature, and I think that in itself could have been a much more unique character dynamic. Like, Jerry tries to maintain this elegant facade, occasionally slipping into more sinister vibes. I wish we'd gotten to see unleashed Akechi kind of goading her and Guernica by matching their intensity, rather than him just being like, haha, yes, quite. In any case. I know that it's all personal preference, but I just imagine this entire story would have been so much better with the third semester versions of this party driving it, instead of forcing us back into Sai Palace time period for the sake of not spoiling a story that anybody playing through this chapter should probably already be familiar with. To give another example, this moment in particular kinda just bugs me.
It's true, this isn't the first time we've been to a world like this. But I've never heard of a ruler going completely mad because they lost their treasure.
With this being Sai Palace Akechi, the fake character he's playing hasn't seen any palace ruler's treasure yet, and only has the other thieves' explanations for how this works as reference. That line would be way more meaningful and interesting if it actually was full-blown Akechi, who does have a greater understanding of how this stuff works, actually being perplexed by it. If the argument for Repaint Your Heart is that they wanted to use Prince Akechi instead of Black Mask Akechi, that's an easy fix. You could have had like 2 lines of dialogue where Akechi says he can't seem to change his costume or persona in the streets. There, handled. Another reason why the time period here bothers me is because when you are familiar with Royal's story, Kasumi becomes so much weirder and more awkward. Now, I don't mean the character, I mean the name Kasumi. So, in Tactica, every character's skill sheet, except for Irina, obviously, refers to them by their code names, right? Joker, Queen, Crow, and so forth. Except, Yoshizawa's just says Kasumi. Now, obviously this makes sense given the timeline they went with, because Yoshizawa didn't get her codename, Violet, until January during the third semester arc. Kasumi and Violet should basically never exist at the same time. Right, Persona 5, the Phantom X? There's actually a moment in Repaint Your Heart when the group is explaining the codenames to Luca, who acts as the support character in battles, and it's so super obvious how they just kind of hope you don't notice that Yoshizawa doesn't have one. But those of you that have played Tactica know that if you play Repaint Your Heart, you can actually unlock Akechi and Yoshizawa as playable units in the main game on New Game Plus. While they have no story role, Futaba actually does refer to Yoshizawa in battle as Violet, which makes sense there because Tactica's main story takes place post-third semester. But that brings me back to what I said before about it making no sense for her skill sheet to still call her Kasumi if she's Violet by now, and I know this has been a long rant about a detail that most people probably didn't notice or care about, but none of this would have been an issue if they just set the game during the third semester. So, okay, that's our existing characters, but what about our new characters? Let's go ahead and start with Luca. She's perfect. I actually have no notes. Like, seriously, she's scrappy, which makes sense because she had to survive on the streets, but she's still a very kind and optimistic person. She serves as a good navigator in battle, and obviously her connection to Guernica and her drive to help her is what propels the narrative. And Grace Liu does a good job with the voice. I love Luca. She's easily the best character, new or old, in this entire chapter. No notes. Moving on. Then there's Guernica, who's a little bit harder to talk about. Like, I mean, her whole thing about, like, haha, yes, kill them all, kill everyone. It's a little cliche because, yeah, she's just brainwashed and she spends most of the story like this, only occasionally being mixed up with the equally cliched splitting headaches that come from trying to shake off the obligatory amnesia. She's honestly a perfectly fine antagonist, but what saves her is mostly just learning about her through Luca, whose earnestness makes us want to help Guernica too. And once we break her free from Jerry and get to meet Tao, I think she's a perfectly fine character, albeit one I do wish we got to spend some more time with. Oh yeah, speaking of Guernica, here's another reason why this should have been a third semester story. So you're probably wondering how Guernica was able to paint that Arsene mural, right? Well, they try to explain it as the real Guernica having the power to see people's hearts. But during the Psy Palace, no one knows that Ren is the leader of the Phantom Thieves yet, so their half-hearted explanation basically implies that Guernica just, like, happened to see Ren when he was at Big Bang Burger or something, saw Arsene in his heart, and was just able to be like, oh dang, that dude's the leader of the Phantom Thieves. Honestly, the mural managing to exist in a Maruki-controlled world where people had already seen Arsene would have made way more sense and further highlighted Guernica's graffiti as this powerful force that it can even surpass Maruki's cognitive abilities. Also, I'm just gonna say it, Tao should have gotten a persona and joined the party. In the same way that Toshiro eventually gets a persona and spends the rest of the game as a fourth party member guest character, Tao should have been the same way for the fight against Jerry. She already has a unique gun, her own mask, a costume, facial cut-ins when she uses special abilities, and even arguably a codename, so why not? The entire scene of her absorbing the memory of her sister into her body, also recovering the spirit of rebellion that came from her first mural, would have been a really good Persona Awakening moment. Instead of just starting every turn in Jerry's battle by laying down some paint for your group to walk on, she should have been a playable unit who creates a paint trail as she moves like she did when she was a boss fight. Would it have been worth the time and effort for Atlas to design and implement a persona that you only get to see and use in a single fight? Arguably not, but many people would also argue this DLC pack shouldn't have been $20, so I say give Tao a persona, Atlas. Also, one final thing I want to bring up with Guernica, and I want to be clear, this is not the fault of her voice actor, I think it just might have been like a sound mixing issue. Very often, Guernica's voice seems way quieter and more muffled than the other characters. And there are even moments where it sounds like she's doing that, you know, quiet yelling thing. You know what I mean? Where it's like, when you want to sound like you're screaming, but it's also 2 AM, and you don't want to wake your mom up because it's a school night. You know, that kind of thing. And that brings me to possibly the hardest character for me to talk about, Jerry. Now, look, much like Repaint Your Heart itself, I love Jerry on the surface. In almost every recent Persona game, it seems like all we get for antagonists are monstrous shadows with little to no personalities, antagonistic humans and the shadows or personas that come from them, and boastful godlike beings that are always just like, I represent mankind's collective desire for Girl Scout cookies to be available year-round. Which are all well and good, I'm not knocking any of those, they work for the stories. But Jerry was just like, again, this overly dramatic bird who seemed to just be having fun fanning the flames of chaos. She clearly has a lot of power, but she was far less interested in using it herself to do stuff, and preferred manipulating a person to cause destruction for her, even planning to have humanity wipe itself out. There was a level of haughtiness and sadism in Jerry's actions that I really liked. I know this may be blasphemous to say, but she actually reminded me a lot of Nyarlathotep, and why he worked so well in the earliest Persona games. And if that's all Jerry had been, I'd have marked her down as one of the most memorable main villains in the series. I certainly think she stands head and shoulders above her master, who we eventually pieced together is Salmael, the main antagonist of Tactica proper, who is, yet again, mankind's collective desire for blah 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 blah. Like, forcing Jerry to just be the Iago to Salmael's Jafar, an enigmatic minion attempting to fulfill the wishes of her lord, albeit in her own unconventional way, was just so sloppy. It also makes her methods and ideas way less consistent. Like, oh yeah, Jerry, you want to create a world of stillness by crushing the whims of rebellion in humanity because that's what your boss wants? I'm gonna say a graffiti artist wasn't a good choice to get that particular ball rolling. Maybe I'm just being narrow-minded, but I didn't need Jerry to be some deeper figure with an ultimately meaningless connection to Tactica's final boss. She worked just fine as this avatar of chaos who excelled in manipulation, and was capable of using trickery and mind control to get others to handle the dirty work for her, all while seemingly having fun doing it. Also, Jerry was voiced by Suzanne Blakesley, whom many of you probably know as Wanda from Fairly OddParents and Maleficent in a lot of the recent Disney stuff, so she obviously did an amazing job giving Jerry the exact voice and attitude you would expect from looking at her.
You do it for representation, to speak for the unheard. There's a reason nobody listens to street trash. All you've done is hide your self-gratification with a punk-flavored sugarcoating of empathy.
And if I can once again go back to the whole time this story takes place thing, another reason why I think it's dumb that this isn't a third semester story is because before we fight Jerry, Akechi has this moment where he's just like, oh, let me guess, you're a god. As if that's something any of these characters have knowingly dealt with before. Why is he so nonchalant about this? Alright, so that's the story and the characters and my complaints with how it all fits into the timeline, but how about Repaint Your Heart as a game? Yeah, it's alright. I mean, look, it's Tactica. The paint mechanic that's unique to the streets works pretty well, but I will confess I never really felt like I got the hang of it. I probably missed a lot of opportunities for follow-up attacks and triple threats and stuff, but that's on me. The story is incredibly linear. Unlike the main game, you can't replay missions for money, experience, or sub-personas. The missions don't even have the bonus conditions that give you a reason to try and do anything beyond the main objective in each fight. There's no Velvet Room, so you just have to use the predetermined personas the fights give you, and there's not even a shop to buy or make new weapons. Luca just occasionally goes, "Here, I found these," and gives you some new guns. And I feel like they could have had a shop. In the story, the gang is all like, "Don't worry, Mousecots, we'll help and protect you," and then we just never talk to any of them ever again. So Luca hiding some of them away in her sewer home and us buying guns from one of them between missions could have been a pretty easy mechanic to incorporate. They do at least keep the optional side conversations that you can do while you're in your home base, and these are mostly just fun, if nothing else. Like, yeah, we learn that Akechi is into bouldering. Cool. Oh yeah, and I should also probably mention Repaint Your Heart has these 5 challenge stages if you want some extra content, but there's literally no reward for doing them. It's just a neat distraction if you want to see, like, Toshiro on the streets, I guess. Alright, and I have saved my biggest gripe with this entire story for last. Remember that post-credit scene I talked about, when Toshiro is watching the news and we see Guernica's mural reflected in his eyes, sparking the will of rebellion within him, and it arguably sets off the entire plot of Persona 5 Tactica? You know, that moment that I absolutely adored and think was perfectly handled and legitimately have no notes on regardless of how much else I've criticized here today? Okay, well, once again I have to bring up that this should have been a third semester story, because it would have made way more sense for Salmael to trap Toshiro in the kingdoms as soon as possible after Toshiro's rebellion flame was lit. The way they did it here implies that it sparked in early to mid-November, and then, what, Salmael just decided to keep an eye on it? Did it take him a lot of time to put the kingdoms together? Why did it take 5 or 6 months between this post-credit scene and the start of Tactica, which is presumably in like late February to early March? But here's actually the kicker. Here's what I absolutely hate. According to Tactica, it didn't. See, when you play Persona 5 Tactica, there's a moment after Toshiro awakens to his persona, Ernesto, and we learn about how Samael trapped him in the kingdoms. The Phantom Thieves ask if there was any sort of recent event or situation that made Toshiro think, as Ryuji puts it,
I'm having a burst of willpower, baby!
And look, full disclosure, I played Repaint Your Heart before Tactica's main story, so I was fully ready for Toshiro to acknowledge Guernica or her mural, even if it was just in a really vague way about seeing the art on the news or something to connect it back to Repaint Your Heart and that one striking image from the post-credits scene. But he doesn't. The game doesn't. It just says that Toshiro's Spark of Rebellion came from when he saw the Phantom Thieves send Shido's calling card in Persona 5. How do you do that? How do you retcon the connected DLC chapter to your own story in the same game? They even use the same image of Toshiro and his dad watching the news when talking about Shido that they used when they were discussing Guernica. They had one perfect moment, one undeniably great connection between these two stories, only for the main plot, which by the way I think is far less interesting, to sweep it under the rug and pretend like it didn't happen. It's not like Repaint Your Heart came out months later, it was a day one DLC. They could have easily tweaked the main story dialogue to acknowledge it, and I don't know if any of you care, but this bothers me so much more than it should. Like, okay, if I may give a slight concession here, Lavenza does state that Toshiro's recollection of events is only a possibility for when the seed of rebellion could have been planted in him, and that personas can awaken in other ways. So it's not like an absolute contradiction of Repaint Your Heart, but I do still think the main game's handling of this moment only serves to weaken both stories. Alright, and that's Persona 5 Tactica's Repaint Your Heart. A genuinely amazing foundation with a lot of potential that just seems bogged down by Atlus being scared of their own continuity. This could have been one of the best side stories in the entire franchise, and given us a lot more of two characters who could have benefited from some more exploration. I do still really like this story despite its flaws, but I'm not gonna leap to recommend paying the $20 to play through this 4-hour adventure. I don't know, maybe just grab it when it's on sale or something. Oh yeah, one final thing I do have to mention though, throwing this out there, The Night We Stood is an absolute banger of a track. This is seriously one of my favorite Persona songs of all time.